Some characters change the way we look at storytelling. Some we get multiple full novels of, some we only see for a singular movie, others barely have more than a few scenes. Yet there is something that unites the ones that we remember. What that is has been defined plenty of ways by plenty of people, but I'm going to offer my perspective on why getting characters right matters so much, what truly makes a character great, and later give some examples of characters across mediums and genres that all manage to be great despite not having all that much in common. Having a coherent plot, a series of events from A to B, even if understanding it isn't so clear, a la The Sound and the Fury, is the structure that holds up a story. World building makes up the foundation of the structure as well as the choices in paint and decor, but such a house has little purpose without its occupants. Stories can't really be written without characters. Even if someone gets clever and includes not even one thinking being in the story, even a narrator is a character of sorts. Such examples, rare as they are, end up turning a concept into a character of sorts regardless, so it's something that is difficult to escape. Fundamentally, characters are what make us emotionally connect with a story. To demonstrate, let me pose you two fictional examples. Say you're sitting down watching the news on Terrible Things Only TV. You end up hearing about a bridge collapsing in a nearby town and 10 people die in the carnage. You don't know anybody involved, but you probably feel some pity for them, and you wonder why you're even watching the news and then get up and do something else. But then say you sit down the next day and watch that same news station. Today they're talking about a girl named Jane. She was 19 years old and drowned in a lake after her car was rammed off the road by a drunk driver. Jane was driving home for the summer from college and hadn't got to see her family again before the incident. I'd ask what connects more to you, but I don't necessarily need to. The natural human response is to hear Jane's story and be sad about it. Yet at the same time, if Jane had instead come down the day before and gotten caught up in the bridge incident, you'd never have known who she was, even though her fate would have been basically the same. Not feeling as much for her in that scenario, where you obviously no longer know her name, does not make you a bad person. People aren't good with numbers, and we also aren't great at handling bad events. When you heard about the 10 dying, but none are singled out or named, there's nothing for your brain to connect to, and so you don't feel it as much. I can remind you that over 60 million people died in World War II, over half of which were civilians, and that some of them, had they not been killed, would still be alive today, if extremely elderly. You know this intellectually, but emotionally, unless you've met or read accounts from a veteran or survivor of the war's traumas, this doesn't mean much to you. Even if you've heard firsthand accounts, you only understand those individual perspectives. There's no possible way for you to emotionally process the death of so many people. Thus, when it comes to fiction, those individual perspectives become the eyeglass through which we see the story's events take place. But they're also our emotional connection to it. We care about stories because we care about the people who live in them, or come to care about them anyway. And while yes, it would be important for the writer of a memoir or a biography or any other piece of nonfiction to make the people they're talking about translate well onto the page, when it comes to writing fiction, the duty becomes extra important. Because sometimes we can care about a story regardless of individual perspectives. The thing I find most interesting about World War II, for example, is reading first-hand accounts of the battle against one of the greatest evils the world has ever known. I really enjoy Unbroken, the biography of Louis Zamperini, because I don't care that he didn't fight and destroy the Japanese army single-handedly. I care about his human struggle to survive beyond abhorrent conditions. But other people find interest in reading about the events in a more detached way. Reading about D-Day or Stalingrad or Kursk or what have you. Even I enjoy doing that sort of thing. And that's because these events were real, and had any one of them gone different, our world today would look very different. It's reasonable to care about that, even if you don't go out of your way to find the human individual element, because it was real. Fiction does not have that luxury. You're telling a story about a thing that never happened. Even if it's a great story, one chock full of spectacle, action, and everything one could want in a plot, it didn't actually occur. There's no inherent value in knowing the plot to a fictional story. Notice the specific phrasing of that, though. No value in knowing its plot, not its themes, its plot specifically. Knowing the events that occur in the plot of The Matrix might be helpful to you on trivia night, but it's not really doing anything for you if you didn't actually watch the movie. You understand there's a guy trapped in a simulation who met other people who realized it was a simulation and decided to do something about it. He does battle with those who enforce the secrecy and maintenance of the simulation, and comes to discover his ability to master the artificial world he finds finds himself in. Trivia answer, yes. Actual point of the story, no. And you'll know this if you've ever been in a situation where you've explained to someone the plot of something, especially if it's a story that you yourself are writing. You might well find that the person you're speaking with responds to your diatribe about how you're about to write the next Moby Dick with, yeah man, sounds cool. And you'll be disappointed because they didn't recognize the inherent brilliance in your plot summary. They might have meant what they said, they might want to read it, but they aren't going to care. Not the way you do. But if they read it and find your plucky and totally original sailor Bishmael and his captain Bahab are really quite fascinating guys, and that you can actually finish a story when you start writing one, they might start actually caring at that point. All of this has been to say that characters serve a role of utmost importance to the flow of a story. It's easier to compensate for a more simple plot than basic characters and still end up with something incredible. Faulkner's As I Lay Dying is all about a southern family's multi-day trip to bury their mother in town, but the characters uplift what could have been a really boring story. You can definitely make good plot-driven stories. Don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously, you don't need me to tell you that. But even if you have a complex plot, if it gets dragged down by bad characters, you're going to struggle to surpass one of the above-average Need for Speed movies. But let's get down to it. Now I'm going to talk good characters, and once I list some, I'm going to tell you the bottom-of-the-barrel obvious thing that makes them good, and then we'll discuss the nuances therein. We're going to focus on protagonists just because there's a lot of material, but the same general principles apply to any character, and these aren't all protagonists. So we're going to talk Blade Runner and Rick Deckard. We're going to be quirky and talk Silent Hill, but not 2, 3 instead with Heather Mason. We've got Fox Mulder and Dana Scully, though we'll be focusing on Scully this time around. We've got Fallout New Vegas's Joshua Graham, and to round it out, we've got Sherlock Holmes, because why not? What do they all have in common? Say it with me, they're interesting. That's pretty much it. But the reason I've been rambling so long this video is because if I opened it and just said, hey guys, so the core of a good character is that they're interesting, and then just started rambling about my character fixations, that might have been funny, but not very useful. As it were, interesting can take a lot of different forms. So we'll start with Rick Deckard, the protagonist of Blade Runner. I want to start with him because he disproves some of the initial concepts one might have regarding good characters or good protagonists. Namely that he isn't super likable. He has no save the cat moment, really, and his job is to be a cop that explicitly liquidates the kind of human replicants, and after the movie is through, the way his job operates feels even worse. A lot of writing advice centers around likability and even goodness for a protagonist, and while plenty will encourage morally gray, those who actively push for it often mean it in the stupid, I killed a village full of children today, but I didn't beat my wife, so I'm morally gray fashion, which isn't effective. That is to say that likability and goodness are important in certain contexts. For example, if you want the audience to be in particular sympathetic to a character, but other times it just doesn't matter as much. You can go too far in the opposite direction and make a protagonist that the audience will just hate the personality of, or be too disgusted with their actions to get invested, but you aren't bound to audience pleasers, and Deckard is a good example. His best quality at times is being played by Harrison Ford. He doesn't talk much and arguably doesn't deserve to be saved by Roy Batty at the end, and yet we still find ourselves rooting for him because we grow sympathetic. He's flawed in pretty human ways. He's hardened to a dreary job in a dreary world who didn't even want to come back and do what he's doing at the movie's beginning. And when he does kind of grow a heart, it helps counterbalance the assumptions that we've made about him so far. Nothing he ever says matches the sheer magnitude of Roy Batty's Tears and Rain speech, but he didn't need to do that. But moving in a different direction, we can talk about Heather Mason, the star of Silent Hill 3. With her, I want to make one particular point. Basically just one. I do like her throughout the game. She has the believable personality of a teenager having to do the horrible duty of being a Silent Hill protagonist, without being annoying the way that teenage characters definitely can be in these kinds of stories. She wins on likability easily. But the thing that sold her for me requires me to spoil the 22-year-old game, so bear that in mind, I guess. Pretty early on, after she escapes the shopping mall that is the game's intro sequence, she enters her apartment to find Harry Mason, the protagonist of the first game, dead, killed off screen by a demon. While her reaction to this is heartbreaking to watch, it wasn't a moment that worked that much for me as it apparently has for others, because I was just pissed that they textbook fridged such an important character, without him even really getting to be a part of the game first. However, it's also in this moment that it becomes clear, though unfortunately I did already know, that she was, in fact, the Cheryl Mason that Harry rescued at the end of Silent Hill 1. From what I heard, this actually wasn't known at the time of the game's release, so must have been a big surprise. But what that means for our purposes, without me explaining the whole game, is that she suddenly gained a reason to go back to Silent Hill and finish what was ultimately started for her, as the story has been leading up to her return as the intended carrier of the god the cultists of Silent Hill have been trying to create. And yet through all the rest of the game, which, save for the fridging, is really good, the thing that finally got me is at the very end, once you defeat the demon monster Claudia, the game's main antagonist, becomes, you expect Cheryl Mason to walk away triumphant, and she says a few things that imply that the ending will essentially be happy. There are a little bit of Silent Hill, slightly cheesy dialogue a bit, and that's just what we're used to expecting from this kind of character in this kind of story, so the ending seems like it's going to be sort of predictable-ish. But then her face changes and she breaks down again at the loss of her father, just right at the end there. And it was that moment that finally sold that loss for me, because it was so genuinely human. A character walks away from the defeated enemy, triumphant, roll credits. A human remembers why they just had to fight a difficult battle in the first place, and they still hurt about that reason. And while I did like Cheryl before that moment, sometimes it really is just one instant that makes a character go from good to great. Next, I want to talk about the X-Files' Dana Scully, particularly as we see her in Season 1, Episode 13, Beyond the Sea. I could talk about Mulder, but everyone who watches the show knows Mulder is great, but some don't give Scully nearly enough credit. While this episode is still pretty early in the show's running, we've been far enough in that we're beginning to understand better who she and Mulder are as characters. Mulder is the believer, the one who's willing to put himself in danger and accept the out there possibilities. Scully is the rational skeptic, always looking for well-reasoned explanations for whatever strange things they encounter. In the paradigm set up thus far, Mulder also tends to be the leading role more often. But this episode was different. It gave Scully the spotlight and the position as believer. The episode opens with her getting together with her parents and then her father passing away shortly thereafter. While it's not as if we, the audience, are particularly attached to her father, and I'm realizing now I'm doing 2 back-to-back dead dads, but alas, it's still effective because Scully is well-written and likable, but also because we haven't really seen her express these kinds of emotions before. But it's really as the episode progresses that we see her shine. 2 teenagers have been kidnapped, and a mass murderer who claims to be psychic says he can help the authorities catch the kidnapper. Mulder had encountered this guy before and is beyond confident that this supposed psychic is a fake. But when the mass murderer, named Boggs, starts humming the same song that was being played at Scully's father's funeral, she begins to believe there might be something to it. When Mulder is shot and taken out of commission, in a way corresponding with a prediction Boggs made, Scully is absolutely in center stage for the rest of the episode, and we get to see her working through this situation. Because Boggs ain't offering to help for free. He wants his death penalty reduced to a life sentence and has no clearly explainable proof that he actually knows anything about what's going on in the kidnapping, so it all looks very suspicious. But Scully tries and fails to get his sentence commuted since enough weird stuff has happened that she's willing to take this leap of faith that before has been so associated with Mulder and not her. Boggs helps her anyway, despite him knowing when she then lies to him about actually succeeding in getting the sentence reduced. With that information, Scully catches the kidnapper, and Boggs has then offered for her to get a final message from her father, which, considering he's still going to get executed anyway, is something she doesn't have much time to receive or make a decision about. And it's a message she really wants. During the funeral earlier in the episode, she expressed worry that her father, who'd said he didn't approve of her career path, wasn't proud of her. And this final communion would have been an opportunity to clear the air. But she doesn't go, and Boggs dies never telling her what her father might have said, because at the end of the episode, she repeats what her mother told her at the funeral, that her father was her father. She knew he was proud of her and didn't need a mass murderer to channel his spirit from the beyond to tell her that. And really, as X-Files episodes go, while I do think overall it does benefit as a show from being watched in order, If you just had to pick one to watch, Beyond the Sea is not a bad pick. And now for something completely different. Joshua Graham is all the rage in contemporary discussions about Fallout New Vegas, a game that never seems to die, not that I want it to. In case you don't know about him or the game he's from, Fallout New Vegas is, to vastly oversimplify, a game that takes place in the Mojave Desert after a nuclear war. Joshua Graham is holed up in a place a bit closer to Utah and is a believer in a faith that stems from Mormonism. He used to work for the Legion, the Rome cosplayers that loot and pillage everything they come across, but he screwed up one day and their leader set him on fire and threw him down a canyon. But he got better, kind of. I chose him to talk about in our little character rapid fire because he too is unlike the other choices. He's not a protagonist, he's just a side character in a DLC, and yet he inspires about as much discussion as characters with quadruple his screen time. Why is that? Well, it's fair to say some of it is, as the kids say, hype moments and aura. He has a cool voice. He looks cool. He has cool guns and does cool things with them. These aesthetic things do matter. They are the attention grabber, but there does exist a timeline in which he just quotes Bible verses with that gravelly voice of his and it has no particular depth to it. But why isn't that what it is? In essence, he is a case of a character strongly principled and yet with their key flaw being something that leads them to violate that strong principle. And when you set that dynamic up right, it always creates something really interesting. His beliefs tell him that he should treat everyone, even his enemies, with mercy, deference, and forgiveness. And yet, when brought into a position where he has ultimate authority to do whatever he wants against the man who killed his family, Salt Upon Wounds of the Whitelegs tribe, he'll execute him if you as the player don't actively convince him to not. If you let him kill Salt Upon Wounds, he doesn't learn anything and descends into further violence in the post-ending cutscene. You can kill Salt Upon Wounds yourself and get a slightly better ending, but only by finally convincing Joshua Graham to align his actions with his principles do you defeat his key flaw, and in sparing Salt Upon Wounds completely, Joshua Graham finally starts to live the way that his beliefs, and the core of goodness that it's clear he still has at least a bit of, would suggest. All characters should have flaws, and if they're in conflict with their principles, all the better and all the more potential to do something wonderful with them. But we'll close out this video with Sherlock Holmes from the original Doyle stories, not the show. You don't need me to explain who Sherlock Holmes is, so we can save a little time with him. But the key thing to address is he is the perfect example of doing an intelligent protagonist. And writing intelligence correctly isn't actually particularly difficult if you're willing to actually think things through. That's because it requires them to solve mysteries they are presented with by logically putting together evidence, even if that means connecting dots that don't obviously connect together so much as they can reasonably be connected together. This is opposed to stupidly written intelligence, which looks more like, here's an impossible riddle with no clues or evidence, and I'm going to solve it with my smartness powers. Which is, from what I hear anyway, essentially how the show works. But don't quote me on that, I only say that because it would be very ironic if true. But back onto our main point, let's take the speckled band. The truth of the mystery is a terrible stepfather is trying to kill his stepdaughter because he'll get money out of it. He has connected a wire between the ventilator in her room and his so that a snake he owns can crawl on it, drop on her bed, and bite her. Sherlock figures this out by spotting a cage and a saucer of milk in the stepfather's room, figuring out that the stepfather owns an animal. He notes the odd unbroken connection between the ventilation and the stepdaughter's room, and the fact that the bed is bolted to the floor, and bearing in mind the stepdaughter had been warned of a speckled band, and that the stepfather had spent time in Asia and had some interactions with exotic animals, this all leads Sherlock to the conclusion that it must be a poisonous snake. There's even more to it than that, but suffice it to say there was no magic conclusion jumping. It might not be obvious to the reader how he's putting it together, but if you reread the story or you're just really paying attention the first time around, you'll see it clearly. That's how intelligence should actually work in storytelling. Sherlock Holmes as well, while proving himself to be a bit of an odd guy, isn't the stereotypical, detached, completely uncaring figure that a lot of genius characters are written to be. He has scenes where he is genuinely compassionate and such. So no, making a character good at figuring things out does not mean you need to make him annoying or antisocial. You can, but it isn't a requirement. Anyway, today's another rambly video. I kind of like making these. I hope you like watching them. If you have any more good examples of characters that are effectively written, especially if it's a case of doing a particular principle really well, then let me know about it in the comments, which I try to read as many of as possible. But we finally reached a point on this channel where I can say I actually get too many to read them all, which is both a little sad, but I'm also very grateful for it. In addition, every like and subscription goes a long way. We also have a Discord if you want to hang out with my editor and I, and a Patreon if you're crazy enough to want it, where we post all our videos a week early. On that note, I'd like to thank our patrons, Shadowrunner, Sani, and Isaac Parrott, Knights of the Inner Circle.
We'd also like to thank Raymond Don, also a Knight of the Inner Circle.
Vion and Jodion Void, our knights, and Greer, our loyal squire. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and remember, writing a character to be interesting can be difficult. But if you find something that's interesting to you and you understand why, probably going to be interesting to other people too.